You've probably heard that human evolution stopped, that once we invented medicine, agriculture, and technology, natural selection no longer applied. We conquered nature, so evolution ended. But that's completely wrong. Humans are evolving faster now than at almost any point in our history. And we're not just passively evolving, we're actively driving our own evolution in ways no species ever has. Vaccines didn't stop natural selection. They changed the selection pressures. Antibiotics, agriculture, cities, even C-sections. Each one altered which genes succeed and which fail. Evolution didn't stop. It just got weird. And we're the ones steering it. Evolution is often thought of as something that happened in the distant past. Lucy walking upright, Neanderthals in caves, our ancestors losing body hair and gaining big brains. But evolution is not a historical event. It's an ongoing process. Anytime there is reproduction, variation, and differential survival, evolution occurs. And humans still reproduce. Our genes still vary. Some people have more children than others. Therefore, humans are still evolving. The only question is how and how fast. For most of human history, evolution was shaped by the environment. If you lived in a cold climate, genes for lighter skin and body fat retention were advantageous. If you lived where malaria was common, the sickle cell mutation, despite its costs, provided resistance and spread. If you couldn't digest milk as an adult, you couldn't exploit dairy farming, so lactase persistence genes swept through pastoral populations in just a few thousand years. These changes didn't take millions of years. They happened in dozens or hundreds of generations. Evolution can be fast when selection pressure is strong. But then something changed. Humans started modifying their environment. We invented fire, clothing, shelter. We domesticated plants and animals. We built cities. We created medicine. Each of these innovations changed the selection pressures on our genome. And contrary to popular belief, they didn't eliminate selection. They redirected it. Evolution didn't stop. It shifted gears. Take lactose tolerance. For most mammals, lactase, the enzyme that digests milk sugar, shuts off after weaning. Adults can't digest milk, but when humans domesticated cattle and sheep around 10,000 years ago, populations that herded animals gained a huge nutritional advantage if they could drink milk into adulthood. A genetic mutation that kept lactase production turned on spread rapidly. Today, about 35% of the global population can digest lactose as adults, with much higher rates in Northern Europe and parts of Africa and the Middle East. This is evolution in fast forward, driven by cultural invention. Agriculture itself changed human evolution. The shift from hunting and gathering to farming altered diet dramatically. More carbohydrates, less protein, different micronutrients. Genes related to starch digestion, insulin regulation, and immune response to new pathogens began to shift. Populations that adopted agriculture early show genetic signatures of adaptation to high-carb diets. Some groups have more copies of the amylase gene, which helps break down starches. That's a direct evolutionary response to eating grains. Agriculture also brought something else: density. When humans started living in large permanent settlements, diseases spread more easily. Smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, plague, these are diseases of civilization. They don't thrive in small, mobile hunter-gatherer bands, but in cities, they exploded. This created intense selection pressure for immune system genes. People with genetic resistance to these diseases survived and reproduced. Those without died young. Over centuries, populations in agricultural societies developed genetic adaptations to endemic diseases. This is why Europeans, Asians, and Africans who lived in densely populated regions for millennia have different immune profiles than populations that remained hunter-gatherers longer. Then came vaccines. The first vaccine, against smallpox, was developed by Edward Jenner in 1796. Vaccination spread globally, and by 1980, smallpox was eradicated. Some people argue this stopped natural selection. After all, if vaccines prevent death from disease, then immune genes no longer matter. But that's too simplistic. Vaccines changed the selection pressure. They didn't eliminate it. Before vaccines, smallpox killed about 30% of those infected. People with certain immune genes had better survival rates. After eradication, those genes no longer provide a survival advantage. But that doesn't mean evolution stopped. It means selection shifted to other traits. For example, vaccines reduce infant and child mortality dramatically. In pre-modern societies, roughly half of children died before age 5, mostly from infectious diseases. High child mortality created strong selection for genes related to immune function, pathogen resistance, and overall robustness. Vaccines and antibiotics drastically reduced this mortality. Suddenly, children who would have died in previous generations survive and reproduce. This means genes that were previously selected against, because they led to early death, are now neutral or even advantageous in other contexts. Consider sickle cell disease. The sickle cell mutation causes red blood cells to deform, leading to pain, organ damage, and early death if you inherit 2 copies. But if you inherit 1 copy, you're resistant to malaria. In regions where malaria is endemic, the mutation is advantageous despite its costs. But in regions without malaria, or where malaria is controlled by medicine and mosquito nets, the mutation is purely harmful. Selection is now acting against it in those populations. Evolution is happening in real time, driven by changes in disease environment. Antibiotics are another example. Overuse of antibiotics has driven the evolution of resistant bacteria at alarming speed. But it's also affecting human evolution. Some people have genetic variants that influence their gut microbiome composition, which in turn affects how they respond to antibiotics, how quickly their microbiome recovers, and their susceptibility to antibiotic-related side effects. As antibiotic use becomes ubiquitous, selection may favor people whose microbiomes are more resilient or whose immune systems compensate better. This is speculative, but plausible. The environment we create, including the chemical environment inside our bodies, shapes which genes thrive. Modern medicine has also introduced new selection pressures through C-sections. Historically, if a baby was too large or the mother's pelvis too narrow, childbirth could be fatal for both. This created selection against very large babies and very narrow pelvises. But C-sections bypass this constraint. Women who would not have survived childbirth now do, and pass on their genes. Over generations, this could lead to shifts in pelvic shape and average baby size. Some researchers argue this is already happening. Human bodies are evolving in response to medical intervention. Diet is another frontier. The modern Western diet, high in processed sugars, refined grains, and unhealthy fats, is recent in evolutionary terms. Humans evolved eating mostly whole plants, lean game, and occasional fruits. Our metabolism is tuned for that environment. But in the past century, diets have changed radically. This creates selection pressure. People with genetic variants that predispose them to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease on modern diets may have lower reproductive success, either through early death or reduced fertility. Conversely, people with genes that protect against metabolic disease on poor diets have an advantage. Evolution doesn't care about health per se. It cares about reproduction. If you live long enough to have kids and raise them, your genes spread, regardless of whether you're healthy at 60. Interestingly, some populations show rapid adaptation to new diets. The Inuit, who traditionally ate almost no carbohydrates, have genetic adaptations for metabolizing fat and protein efficiently. Pacific Islanders, who experienced periodic famines, may have thrifty genes that store fat aggressively, adaptive in a feast or famine environment, but maladaptive in a context of constant caloric surplus. These are not ancient adaptations. They happened in the last few thousand years. Evolution is ongoing and responsive. Then there's the question of cognitive and psychological traits, intelligence, personality, mental health. Are these evolving? This is controversial because it ventures into uncomfortable territory. But scientifically, the answer is probably yes. Any heritable trait that affects reproduction is subject to selection. Intelligence is heritable, though not entirely genetic. And in modern societies, there are complex relationships between intelligence, education, income, and fertility. In some contexts, higher education correlates with delayed reproduction and fewer children. In others, it correlates with better child survival. The net effect on evolution is unclear and likely varies by population and era. But the idea that psychological traits are somehow exempt from evolution is biologically untenable. Behavior itself can drive genetic evolution through gene-culture coevolution. When humans invented cooking, it changed our guts, teeth, and jaws. When we invented language, it may have selected for brain regions supporting syntax and speech. When we created monogamous marriage systems, it may have shifted selection on traits related to pair bonding and paternal investment. Culture changes the environment, which changes genetic selection, which changes behavior, which changes culture. It's a feedback loop, and it's accelerating. One striking example: altitude adaptation. Tibetans, Andean populations, and Ethiopian highlanders have all adapted to high-altitude, low-oxygen environments, but they did so differently, using different genes. Tibetans have mutations affecting hemoglobin regulation. Andeans have increased lung capacity and red blood cell production. These adaptations arose independently in just a few thousand years. This is some of the fastest human evolution ever documented. It shows that when selection pressure is strong, like hypoxia at 4,000 meters, evolution can be rapid. Now, consider future evolution. Where are humans headed? The answer depends on what we do. If we continue to modify our environment through technology, we'll continue to change our evolutionary trajectory. Gene editing, for example, could allow us to directly alter the human genome. CRISPR and other tools make it possible to remove disease-causing mutations, enhance desirable traits, or introduce entirely new capabilities. This isn't natural selection. It's artificial selection, self-directed. If we start editing embryos to eliminate genetic diseases, we'll be driving evolution deliberately. Some see this as liberation from the blind, cruel process of natural selection. Others see it as hubris, a dangerous path toward inequality and unintended consequences. Even without genetic engineering, modern technology is changing evolution. Online dating algorithms affect who meets and mates. Reproductive technologies like IVF and egg freezing allow people to delay reproduction, changing the timing and number of offspring. Sperm and egg donation introduce genetic variation across populations in new ways. Global migration mixes gene pools that were historically isolated. All of this affects human genetic diversity and the direction of evolutionary change. There's also the question of selection relaxation. In modern societies, especially wealthy ones, almost everyone survives to reproductive age. Infant mortality is near zero. Death from disease, predation, or starvation is rare. This reduces selection intensity. Mutations that would have been lethal or debilitating in the past are now tolerated. Some geneticists worry about genetic load. the accumulation of slightly harmful mutations that aren't being purged by selection. Over many generations, this could reduce average fitness, but this is speculative and contentious. Evolution is not goal-oriented. There's no optimal human, and what counts as harmful depends on environment. One thing is clear: evolution has not stopped. It's just operating under different conditions. Instead of being shaped primarily by climate, predators, and pathogens, humans are now shaped by culture, technology, medicine, and social structures. These are still environments. They still exert selection pressure. Evolution doesn't care whether the pressure comes from a lion or a C-section. It only cares about differential reproduction. So where does this leave us? It means that the future of humanity is not fixed. We are not the end point of evolution. We are a species in flux, adapting to environments we ourselves create. Every medical innovation, every cultural shift, every technological breakthrough changes the game. And because we're aware of evolution, we can, potentially, guide it. Not through eugenics or coercion, but through informed choices about medicine, reproduction, and society. That power is both exhilarating and terrifying, because evolution is not a force we can fully control. It's an emergent process arising from billions of individual choices and random mutations. We can nudge it. We can't dictate it. In the end, human evolution is a story still being written. Vaccines, antibiotics, and agriculture didn't end the story. They started a new chapter. And you, your genome, your choices, your children, are part of it. Evolution didn't stop when we became modern. It became something we participate in consciously. The question is, what do we do with that knowledge,